on this wonderful location. It's a real pleasure to be here, actually, in Crete and in Greece for the first time. I'm going to be talking about an issue which has already come up a few times in the conference so far, especially in the discussions, our representation of space and the grasp we have on space. I think we have some space aids down there in front. The question already arose yesterday, I think, especially in discussion after Nick's talk and Heather's talk and others, about the question of whether we have some kind of peculiarly direct grasp of space and conception of how the external world is structured with respect to space, at least some kind of direct knowledge of what spatial relations are in the external world, or whether our grip on space is somehow more like our grip on color, has a somewhat indirect character to it, just somehow opaque to us. And I'm going to be arguing today that our grip on space is perhaps more opaque than we might have thought, and less transparent. I'll do this by going through three puzzles, three different aspects of spatial experience: orientation, size, and shape. In each case, thinking about certain philosophical puzzles about these things, running some thought experiments, and drawing some models. And then towards the end, I'll discuss the upshot of this for some issues about skepticism. Okay, so the first puzzle, which concerns orientation, in particular our representation of left and right. So the puzzle is it possible that everything before you, for your entire life, has been mirror reversed? What's on your left is actually on your right, and vice versa. It seems to be, for example, what seems to be on your left is actually on your right, and vice versa. So it seems to me that Margie is on my left, and that Nick is on my right. But could it be that, in fact, Nick is on my left, and Margie is on my right? That everything that appears to be on my left is actually on my right, and vice versa. Okay, so we'll start with some immediate clarification. First of all, what's possible here means, is it epistemically possible? Roughly in the sense that you can't be certain that things are that way. So, can you be certain that things are not mirror reversed in this way? Is it a coherent hypothesis to suppose that things are mirror reversed in this way? So here a useful comparison point is thinking about standard Cartesian skeptical scenarios, such as the scenario in which you're being deceived by Cartesian demons, gives you certain sensations even though the world isn't a certain way. It's certainly very commonly held that we can't be certain that we're not in such a scenario to be consistent with all our immediate perceptual evidence, and so on. And at least this can't be ruled out with certainty. The question is, does this hypothesis about left-right inversion at least rise to the status of some of these Cartesian skeptical scenarios? Second clarification is that this concerns a certain sort of perceptual error. Roughly what we can do it in terms of vision, although I think one can equally apply it to all the senses that involve orientation. Roughly, what visually appears to be on your left is actually to your right. So I'm not here concerned with errors in belief or language. The corresponding questions arise there, and we'll get fairly similar treatment. Things you believe to be on your left are actually on your right, and vice versa. Things you say are on your left are actually on your right. And in the linguistic case, and arguably in the belief case, this brings in further complications about, maybe I'm misusing the word left all my life. I've thought the word left means that direction, and for everyone else, not humiliate me. That direction, and kind of comes in. In the perceptual case, maybe this is less of a worry, so it's a bit purer. Clarification 3. I'm not asking, is it possible that everything is now mirror reversed? I think you can make a pretty plausible case that that much, at least, is possible. About temporary reversals in a second. Rather, the the question is it possible that everything has always been mirror reversed? Say, for my entire lifetime, I've been getting this stuff wrong. Maybe an entire community could be getting it wrong. It raises questions at these levels. I mean, if we just do it for temporary reversals, it's very plausible, I think, that things could now be mirror reversed, at least for a moment. Maybe I've recently been fitted with left-right inverting lenses. You know, up-down inverting lenses. Or we could equally have left-right inverting lenses that switch around the inputs to your retinas. And at least for a moment, at least, maybe the first moment I'm fitted with inverting lenses, and I open my eyes, and boy, it seems to be that Nick's actually over there, Marty's actually over there, but it seems to be this way around. It's all flipped. Now, of course, the moment I start to act, assuming my body hasn't been flipped too, I'm going to move my right arm, and I'm going to see my left arm move, and that's going to be weird. And it's pretty likely that within some short period of time, something's going to happen to reconcile that, and things will flip back, as happens in the case of up-down inverting lenses, as we know. We'll readapt very soon. But at least momentarily, it seems there's no problem with the idea that things could flip in this way, and what appears to be on my left is actually on my right. But the question here concerns permanent reversal. Could that happen for one's whole life? And one natural way to think about this is, well, what if someone's been fitted with left-right inverting lenses their whole life? As soon as the baby was born, we put some left-right inverting lenses on their eyes and swap things around. So for their whole life, you might think, what's actually on their left has appeared to them to be on their right. Would they have been getting things wrong? Now, of course, there's a worry about, again, compensation with relation to the other senses, like hearing and motor effects. So, to make the thought experiment more coherent, I'm probably going to want to add left and right inverting lenses for inverting apparatus for hearing, left and right inverted motor effectors, so that when I perform the kind of motor intention that would normally move my right arm, it'll move my left arm, and so on. Then you can at least make the case of prioritization coherent. Then the question, though, is, just say someone was in a situation like that, flipped since birth, would they have been subject to illusions of orientation their whole life? I meant to get rid of this bit, because it's fun on the scale. So here I'm signaling my own judgment about this case, which is that if someone had been like this since birth, they wouldn't be actually getting things wrong. This would just be how left and right were for them. But if you say yes, some people say yes here. If you say yes, one natural worry is it leads immediately to left-right skepticism. In fact, we don't know which direction is left and which direction is right. If you say yes, it seems unlucky that we get things right. After all, evolution could easily have produced some flip of this form at some point in the evolutionary process. After all, the visual image is upside down on the retina. Who's to say that something like this might have happened with no bad effects on function during evolution? Who's to say it didn't? And in fact, we're all, our whole lives, getting left and right wrong. So, things could be one way, things could be the other way. How do we know that we're actually getting it right? So this leads to left-right skepticism, which I find a slightly dodgy idea myself, but my colleague Sherry Colgan, at least, goes along with the situation and just says, we don't know for sure that direction is left. Nearby questions one could arise here are some familiar philosophical questions. I phrase those ones in terms of skeptical scenarios. One could also phrase questions in terms of inversions, like analogous to the inverted spectrum for color. When you see, when some people see green things, maybe they experience them the way I see red things. Their experiences are swapped with respect to the stimuli. And some people think that you could have a color inversion without any illusions going on. When you see green, you refer to what I'm talking about when I see red, or when I have a red experience. So likewise, could there be inversions of left-right experiences? Some people who have different experiences from me experience on the other side when I see left without, when things are on the left without illusions. Or we can do things in terms of twin-earth cases. I'll say more about all these things in a second. Can we get a Putnam-style twin-earth case for left and right, where a duplicate of me uses the word left to refer to what I refer to when I say right? So I'll say more about all those things in a second, but it's worth illustrating these things with the case of color inversion, where a lot of these issues are more familiar. So take Ned Block's inverted Earth. This is a planet where red things, roses and fire engines and so on, cause what Earthlings call experiences of green and so on. So something which is, has the same physical structure as a rose or a fire engine on Earth causes the kind of experiences that we have when we experience, grass and so on Earth, and vice versa. Maybe these people have all been fitted with inverting lenses, color inverting lenses. And the question arises, do inverted Earthlings have illusory color experiences? Are they getting the colors of things wrong? It's been this way again their whole life. Or are Earthlings getting things wrong? Or both getting things wrong? Or is neither getting things wrong? Are both perceiving the colors of things veridically or accurately? There's at least a very common view in these cases, has a fair amount of intuitive plausibility, that both Earthlings and inverted Earthlings have veridical color experiences. That's color experiences that get things right. On this view, this kind of experience we call experiences of red, the experience of that distinctive phenomenal character that I get when I look at red things, they represent a certain property for me, the property we call redness, physical redness, a certain reflective property of external objects corresponding to a certain disposition to do things with light. The very same kind of experiences in twin Earthlings or inverted Earthlings represents greenness, a different reflectance property, roughly because experiences of that kind are correlated and caused by a very different kind of property in their environment. If this is right, this common view is right, we might say the word red is twin earthable. Here the reference is to Putnam's famous case of twin earth, where Oscar uses the word water to refer to H2O. He's just a regular person on Earth. And we've got this hypothetical planet, twin Earth, where the water, which is just like Earth, except that the stuff that looks like water is actually made of some quite different molecular composition, X, Y, Z. And there's an approximate duplicate of Oscar on twin Earth. Twin Oscar uses the word water, or a corresponding word, to refer not to H2O, but to X, Y, Z. We can say a word is twin earthable when you can get thought experiments like that. We can get cases like that going. That's where functional and phenomenal twins, it's best not to make them physical twins, because twin Oscar isn't strictly speaking a physical twin of Oscar. He has X, Y, Z in his body after all. But he's at least approximately a functional and phenomenal twin, same functional organization, same kind of conscious experiences. The word is twin earthable when a functional phenomenal twin might use a corresponding term with a different reference, as twin Oscar uses water to refer to X, Y, Z. And to avoid the Bird-style cases where there's cases of semantic deference to other users in our linguistic community, let's stipulate that this kind of use is non-deferential, not deferring to a linguistic community. After all, in the Putnam cases, you don't need deference to get things off the ground. So if this is right, if the common view of red is right, and the word red is twin earthable, we might also say that if this view is right, we don't have a transparent grasp of redness as the external property redness, the reflectance property. We can't know what property redness is a priori. It's an empirical discovery, after all, that we live on Earth rather than inverted Earth. It's an empirical discovery. The redness is that external property and not that external property. Likewise, it's an empirical discovery that water is H2O and not X, Y, Z. So, we don't say water is, our concept of water is not a transparent concept of its reference. We don't know a priori what it refers to. Likewise, if this view is correct, the same is true of redness. We might say that the redness is not directly presented in experience, in the sense that any phenomenally identical experience picks out the same property. If that was the case, then you might think there's a fairly plausible case that we can know a priori what property it is. But since all these different users might have the same consciousness, refer to different properties, it starts to look like our grip on redness is not transparent. Instead, we might say on this view, we're related to redness, that is to external redness, properties certain kinds of experiences, those that we call red experiences, those with a certain phenomenal character. If I live in the Earth world, that's one reflective property. If I live in the inverted Earth world, it's another. Then you'll see red experiences represent roughly the same. So the content of red experience is such that they pick out whatever external property normally causes experiences of this kind. So in some other work, I've called this a broadly Phrygian view of the content of red experiences as opposed to a Russellian view. On the Russellian view, they just pick out this property, external redness directly. The phenomenal character of redness just is representing that very property. Whereas on this view, it looks like the relationship of that property is more indirect. The experience builds in something like the content, whatever property normally causes a certain response, maybe this kind of experience. And then that turns out to be a different property in different worlds. And this thing serves as a sort of Phrygian mode of presentation of the property. And that's, I think, something that's going to be touched on in Marty's commentary in the next talk, also in the next talk. We might call this a kind of color functionalism. We pick out colors in virtue of the roles that they play. We pick out external redness in virtue of the role it plays in causing certain responses in us. Okay, so that's a fairly familiar color case. Now let's bring it back to orientation and the left-right case. Whether or not this is the correct view of our relation to color, I think that something like this is very plausibly the correct view of left and right and our concepts and experiences thereof. I was trying to construct a analog for inverted Earth here, where things people are intrinsically identical but connected to different things in the environment. I'm not sure I've got it right, but this was the first attempt. Mirror Earth. So on Mirror Earth, everybody has left-right inverting lenses. I just have them. It's just like Earth, that everybody has left-right inverting lenses, and just have them since birth. And everyone also has left-right inverting, things for the other senses, and left-right inverted effectors. And furthermore, we say the environment is left-right inverted with respect to ours, just as in Locke's inverted Earth is color inverted with respect to ours. Then I think you can make it's a little bit up here around this one, but then I think you can make a case that my counterpart on Mirror Earth might have the same brain state as me when confronted by a mirror environment. Things just get inverted at the interface, so to speak, and let's just hope that people don't get brain surgery and so on, otherwise weird stuff is going to happen. And furthermore, if phenomenology supervenes on the brain, then they'll have the same phenomenology as us too. So things will seem just like this to my counterpart on Mirror Earth, but my counterpart in Mirror Earth will be living in an environment where the external world is actually like that. Margie really will be on his, twin Margie really will be on his right, and twin Nick really will be on his left. So, question is, does the person on Mirror Earth have a left-right illusion? Well, I think plausibly he has no left-right illusion. His term left will refer to what I call that orientation relation that I call right. He refers to things. His term left refers to the relation of being on one's right. If that's right, then the terms left and right are twin-earthable. This is just a twin-earth case. We don't have a transparent grasp on the relations of external leftness and external rightness. Rather, there's two different kinds of orientation experiences. Let's call them L experiences and R experiences. L experiences represent roughly that relation that normally brings about L experiences. R experiences represents roughly that relation that normally brings about R experiences. And if that view is right, it just rules out permanent illusion. You can't have a case where, L experiences are always brought about by things other than the kind of property that they represent. That's what would be required for a permanent illusion. In these permanent flip cases, you'll just instead have something like the people will end up normally being correct. Okay, so that's one view. That's the view I'm sympathetic to about this case. There are some alternative views to get on the table. First alternative is a view we might call absolutism. This is is the view on which we have a transparent grasp of external left and external right, some kind of immediate understanding of what it is to be on one's left and be on one's right in a certain relation. My mirror twin and me represent the same orientation. My mirror twin also represents things as being, might represent, say, Margie as being on his left. In fact, twin Margie is on his right. And so my mirror twin will actually be getting things wrong. Or if we go to the case of my permanent inversion since birth, someone who had a permanent inversion since birth might be actually getting things wrong their whole life. They have a sense that things are on their left, and actually they're on their right. And you can get, I can get in that intuitive mode. Again, my colleague Terry Morgan, I've also heard George Wheeler express this view. There's this absolute leftness. It really is a minor possibility that we've been always getting things wrong. I think it's an unattractive view, but I'll get it on the table. I think some problems for it, at least naturally to left-right skepticism. Another serious worry is that physics tends to suggest no intrinsic difference between these relations. In physics, the relation of being on one's left and the relation of being on one's right. And in physics, it's just symmetrical. There's no categorical difference between the two. I think according to physics, a world which was inverted with respect to left-right would, in terms of its fundamental, its basic physical laws, be basically the same kind of world. There is a subtlety here tied to the fact that some laws of physics seem to involve left-right asymmetries. I still think, Dave Baker has a math paper on this where he makes the case this really doesn't deliver the kind of intrinsic difference between leftness and rightness that would be needed for this kind of left-right inverted physical world to do the job that's needed to be done to deliver intrinsic difference between leftness and rightness. If there's no such difference between external leftness and rightness, then it's not clear how we could transparently grasp one or the other. One of these relations actually obtains in the physical world. Another view is phenomenal externalism. I've been presupposing so far that one's phenomenal state, one's conscious experience, depends just on the structure of one's brain. But there are reasonably popular views these days where experience depends on environmental relations. Heather yesterday talked about naive realism, which is one view where for some naive realists, at least the phenomenology of one's experience depends on the object one is right now seeing. There's also the externalist representationalism associated with Michael Ty and Fred Gretzky and so on, where the kind of experience one has depends in part on the kind of property one's been normally connected to. So brain duplicates connected to different properties would have different experiences. In the color case, for example. So a phenomenal externalist might take the line that the same goes in spatial cases. Experience depends on environmental relations. A physical twin in a left-right inverted environment might then have left-right inverted experience, roughly because the experience that, it corresponds to my experience of things being on the left is an experience caused by things on their right, and maybe somehow constitutively invokes the relation of being on one's right, and therefore gets a different phenomenology, despite the sameness of the internal structure. And likewise, we can say in cases that have the same phenomenology will then involve the same left-right representation. And this will be a way of, this will be another way of saying mirror twins always get things right, while still saying that the representation of left and right correlate with the phenomenology, and maybe they're directly presented to one. Now, problems for phenomenal externalism. There are a bunch of general problems for phenomenal externalism that I and other people have talked about. I won't propose here. Again, there's also the worry there's no intrinsic difference between physical leftness and physical rightness in nature. That there's no sort of categorical difference between these two relations in nature. They're just two different relations. It's just one orientation and the other orientation. It's not clear how they yield some kind of categorical phenomenal difference that we can re-identify over subjects. Okay, still, view worth getting on the table. Alternative 3 is an error theory of representation. And here, in the case of color, some people find an error theory attractive, that our color experiences represent, our experiences of red represent this primitive property of redness that nothing in the world actually has. I guess it was Galileo's view of the matter. It turns out that once you just do a bunch of science, you find that nothing is really red and green in the world. The red and green is just in the head. One attractive way to think about this is what I call the model of Edenic colors. Colors as they might have been in the Garden of Eden. Color experience somehow presents things to us as having these perfect, primitive, qualitative properties, like perfect redness. That, beautiful, perfect quality of redness spread over the surface of objects. And the conceit here is, okay, in the actual world it doesn't seem to be like that. We just find a bunch of physics there. But in the Garden of Eden, that's how things work. In the Garden of Eden, things really were perfectly, primitively, and qualitatively red, and we were directly acquainted with that, and our experience was just taking in the perfect redness of the objects. And then we ate from the tree of illusion, often getting things wrong, and the tree of science. We discovered that things don't really seem to have those perfect properties. And then it's okay. So those Edenic properties are not presented, are not actually present in reality, but still they're at some level represented in experience. So you might take a model like that for the left-right case. You might say, well, somehow experience presents there as being these two absolute orientations, leftness and rightness, and presents objects as standing in the Edenic relations of primitive leftness and primitive rightness to us. Nothing actually stands in those relations to us in the actual world. Physics is symmetrical in this way, and you might hold that all left-right experience is illusory. I don't find that especially attractive to you in this case. I don't even find this distinctive phenomenology of leftness and rightness in my own experience. More on that, a little bit more on that in a second. But again, I'm just mapping out the terrain here. Okay, so the further issue raised by what I just said is whether there is, in fact, some kind of absolute phenomenal orientation at all, whether there really is a phenomenology of leftness and a phenomenology of rightness that have some sort of basic categorical difference. I mean, clearly there's a phenomenology of this direction and that direction, and of there being two different directions. But is there something like an absolute leftness experience, an absolute rightness experience, such that over all subjects with, visual fields of roughly this dimensionality, we can say, oh, that's left for them, and that's right for them, at least experientially. I mean, one thing that's clear is that there's differences between, there's also all kinds of contingent association differences for them. For me, left seems somehow prior to right. So, left is the first one, and right is the second one. But I'm sure that's because I read from left to right, and backing up even further, I grew up learning to drive on the left rather than drive on the right. Well, look, I'm right-handed, so then there's another. There are all these contingent differences between them, but that just gets sort of contingent differences, like this one is the side that I drive on, and that I read from, and this is the one that I have more control of, and so on. If you control for all those things, is there any categorical difference? There's always a fact of the matter as to whether two visual experiences of this kind are always, if there was such a difference, one could make a judgment as to whether two visual experiences are with a roughly similar structure are always phenomenally identical or left-right inverted. I'm actually a bit skeptical that there is such an absolute phenomenal orientation. Jeff Lee has some interesting arguments that there is. I'm inclined to do a modus tollens, where he does a modus ponens and say there's not. I won't get into all the details, but at least in the left-right case, I'm sympathetic with the Frege-Schlick view. There's no absolute orientations. In any given subject, there's just two orientations with various associations for them, and you can't re-identify those phenomenological orientations. Across subjects, one can just compare external contents and things like the sort of associations that I mentioned. I'll skip that because it gets a bit complicated, but feel free to raise that issue in discussion. In any case, I'll get that then now to the second puzzle. And if the left and right one, left your head spinning a little bit, hopefully the second puzzle on that side is in some ways a bit more straightforward. So reset and just regenerate some new intuitions about this one. The second puzzle is it possible that everything is and always has been twice as big as it appears to be? Things that seem to be 1 meter long are actually 2 meters long, and so on. So I seem to be I think myself to be about 6 feet tall. Actually, I'm 12 feet tall, and I've been under an illusion all this time. Same for all of you. You're all, heights ranging between, 10 feet and 14 feet, or something. This room is actually much bigger than it actually seems to be. Okay, does that make sense? At least by the same standards of making sense we talked about before. So same clarification. The issue is epistemic possibility. We be certain the world is not like that. The issue concerns perceptual illusions. And what really matters is that all this have been going on permanently for our whole life. And importantly, everything has to be twice as big here, including one's own body. Maybe you can imagine that one's body is this size, the normal size, and everything else is twice as big. And maybe that's at least a coherent scenario. But that's not the case. Everything has to be twice as big. No trading here on errors about relative size of objects. I'll consider that in the third puzzle. It's absolute size that matters. Again, it's not too hard to get temporary size illusions, but you might maybe we can get temporary shrinking lenses that make things look smaller. And once you think about that, it's actually non-trivial to think just how those would work. So maybe a little bit better. One can run the kind of thought experiment like a Fantastic Voyage or something, where your body suddenly shrinks overnight. So maybe my body doubles in size overnight. Now, to make this work better, it's probably best to suppose that maybe my bed doubles in size overnight as well. Otherwise, I'm going to wake up and my legs overhang the end of the bed, and I'm going to realize immediately something weird is happening, and that'll mess things up. So let's say that my bed doubles in size overnight. Maybe my whole house doubles in size overnight, and that I get up and I wander around my bedroom. Nothing seems weird. I wander around the house. Everything is fine. Drink my coffee. Then I look outside the door, and it's like, what the hell's happened to my car? It's half the size it used to be. And so I'm going to see this shrunken, what seems to be this shrunken environment outside the door. So it seems to me that at least initially then I'll be having a size illusion. When I wander around my house, my body will seem to be the normal size, 6 feet tall, but it won't be. It'll be 12 feet tall. My coffee cup will seem to be its normal size, but it won't be. It'll be twice as big. And then I'll look out the door, and at least initially, my car is going to seem to be, how long is the car? 3 meters long? So a meter and a half long. And I'll be wrong. I'll initially be having size illusions in this kind of case. So you can certainly get temporary size illusions going in a case like this. But now, the question once again concerns permanent size illusion. What if someone were fitted with shrinking lenses since birth, or doubled in size in this way since birth? Would they be having permanent size illusions? And again, I want to say plausibly no illusion, but we can run analogous thought experiments as before. Now the relevant thought experiment is going to be one that Brad Thompson has called double Earth. And for the next little bit, the issues I'm going to be talking about are quite closely connected to issues that Brad was talking about in his work on spatial experience. So double Earth is roughly an inversion or a twin case for size. The rough idea is that on double Earth, everything is twice as big as here, and everything otherwise works the same. It needn't be a whole possible world that's doubled in size. Maybe you'll question whether that's coherent. Maybe it's just a little bit of the world which is doubled, where everything is doubled in size. So someone sets up a little corner of the world where we can do this at least for certain kinds of inanimate objects. There are coffee cups which are otherwise like this one but twice as big, and bottles which are like this but twice as big. And then we just imagine everything, including their bodies like ours, functioning just the same but just as big, and so on. But there are serious questions about whether this is compatible with the actual laws of physics. One thing I'm pretty sure of is, at least where classical mechanics is concerned, this is coherent. Classical mechanics, you can take a bunch of particles of certain masses, certain distances, double all those distances in some locality of the world, and everything will still behave. Keep the masses the same, everything will behave in some nice, coherent way. So in the classical world, we can double ourselves, keep our masses the same, reduce our mass density, and everything will go fine. There are serious questions as to, obviously, quantum mechanics and relativity are going to cause some serious problems, and to really get this going, one's probably going to have to tamper with the laws of physics, either go to counterfactual worlds, or go to mere approximations of these situations in the actual world. But I think not very much depends on that here. I think we can even talk about actual creatures which have which are sizes much bigger and smaller than ours, and think about their visual phenomenality without requiring them to be exact duplicates. But for purity of philosophical reasoning is trying to think about a hypothetical exact case. So my double twin is a functional duplicate of me. Where I see a 1 meter long ruler, he sees a 2 meter long stick and gets a functionally identical brain state. You might think the same kind of experience as me. So, the plausible thing to say about this case is he'll have the same kind of experience as me and won't be suffering from an illusion. If that's right, then my functional and phenomenal twin plausibly uses the word 1 meter to refer to the distance I call 2 meters. If that's right, then absolute size terms like 1 meter are twin-othable. And it's not an issue about units. The basic issue is we don't transparently grasp sizes in experience at all. Absolute sizes are not represented in experience. Roughly, my experience with a certain size represents whatever normally brings about experiences of that relevant size experiences of the relevant kind, just like the Freudian view of color I was talking about. Because I think that's the plausible view here. But again, there are alternatives. There is absolutism about size. You transparently grasp sizes in experience. My old postdoc John Bengtson has taken this view about size experience. He thinks we represent certain size units, and certain sizes, absolute sizes of experience. He thinks as being 6 feet tall, and even my double twin with the same brain state would be representing things as having that size. The other one would be wrong. So on this view, we transparently grasp sizes. My double twin and I represent the same absolute size, and most glance correct. I think this leads to size skepticism. That we at best lucky we're getting things right, and maybe things are actually a million times bigger than they seem to be, or a million times smaller. So after all, beings in those circumstances would have similar experiences. And again, you can raise a worry about the physics. It's not clear there are physical or absolute, there are physical absolute size properties to grasp. But physics where everything was twice as large would be the same physics at the worldwide scale. There's also the phenomenal externalist view, which is interesting in this context. Experience depends on the environment. My double twin has been exposed to a different environment where everything is twice as big, and therefore has different experiences. Experiences of things as being twice as big. So my double twin and I will have different size experiences. And both of us are getting things right. You can raise the same general problems and the same issues, but there are absolute size properties. There's also some really interesting issues what this would be like, what the phenomenology would be like on this naive realist view. What would it be to have an experience of a world just like this, where everything is twice as big? I mean, things will still take up the same proportion of my visual field, I take it, for them. Their sense of action possibilities will be much the same. I guess maybe it would somehow be like, we can have experiences taking up the same visual angle, but given various cues, we can take them to be twice as big and twice as far away. Maybe the thought is their experience will always be like that. My million times multiplied twin would have experiences, so things being a million times larger and further away, but otherwise phenomenally just like this. I have a hard time getting my mind around the phenomenology now. Any phenomenal externalists here might want to have a stab at it. There's also the error theory, on which we grasp primitive organic sizes that nothing actually has. They might have had in the Garden of Eden. All size experience is illusory. And I think that actually, my view is that the Adenic model in this case at least is incorrect, precisely because I don't think the phenomenology of experience even purports to represent absolute sizes. Even in Eden, I think a double twin of mine might have the same kind of size experiences as me. We just don't grasp these Adenic absolute sizes. So there's a fallback here, an obvious fallback, which is okay. We don't transparently grasp absolute size, but we at least transparently grasp relative size. That is, the size of objects relative to each other, relative to our bodies and our reaches, and so on. And maybe we also grasp shapes, like squareness, because those are basically matters of every square size is the same size. And you might say that this relative size and shape terms are not notable. One interesting version of this view, incidentally, was put forward by Simon Foster in a paper about size experience recently in Philosophical Review, where he takes the view that what we really represent is stuff relative to our reach. We represent objects as being within reach. And my double twin also, phenomenally the same as me, also represents an object as being within reach. Its reach is twice as big. So indirectly, he represents bigger sizes. This is an interesting. That's an interesting view. I'm trying to think of it can't be quite as simple as that. It's talking about Alice in Wonderland experience, where I gradually grow to twice the size. Well, keep my eyes open and looking at you guys in the world the whole time. I think at least one way that could go is that everything out there would seem to keep the same size. I would seem to myself to be growing bigger, and twice as tall. And at the end of it, all you guys would seem to be, within my reach. Here I am, master of the universe. I hold you all in the palm of my hand. You guys all seem the same size, and I seem bigger. If that's the case, if that's even coherent, then it seems to me that size can't just be a matter of size relative to one's reach. Of course, there's another way things could go, where all you guys would get smaller, and I would still seem to be the same. Trotter, though, seems to be committed, at least relative to size or body or reach case, seems to be committed to the view that's the only way things could go, which I think doesn't seem quite right. We didn't really experiment currently with the right virtual reality software and see how it seems. Anyway, so the fallback view, though, is whether a rating is exactly relative to one's body or one's reach. The fallback view is relative size and shape terms, at least, are not too notable. Like squareness, at least, you've got a transparent grip on that, or the same length relation. So that leads us to the last puzzle, puzzle 3, which concerns representation of relative size and shape. Now the question is it possible that everything is and always has been stretched out in one direction compared to the way it seems to us to be? So things that look square to us are actually 2-to-1 rectangles, twice as wide as they are high. Things that look like 1-to-2 rectangles, twice as high as they're wide, are actually square. Vision's in effect compressing things. Or things that look circular to us are actually elliptical. Vision compresses to make them circular, and so on. Is that at least coherent? And I think many people who thought the other ones were incoherent, at least are more open to this one, finding, I think that's weird, but I can at least make sense of people being mistaken in that way. Same clarifications as before about epistemic possibility, central error, it's going to be a permanent illusion. It's important everything is going to be 2-to-1 stretched in a certain direction. One's body too, physical dynamics, and so on. It's probably best to make it a fixed direction rather than a relative direction, like up and down, but just pick a direction in space, compress things that way. Well, you might think this is all going to be incoherent and the dynamics just aren't going to work. One way to disentangle the dynamics would work in this way. It would be just like taking the way the actual world would be just like taking a movie of the way things seem to be to us on Earth, like a regular movie, stretching it out 2-to-1 in a given direction. Now, admittedly, when things that look like squares turn around, when it looks like this in reality, in the stretched out world, it's going to be something like, go from that to that, so that bodies that look rigid to us will actually be non-rigid in reality. You can at least make a prima facie sense of it. And I actually think, in a second I'll argue this is physically possible. So a temporary compression case might involve, for example, being considered with compressing lenses that make things look half as wide as they actually are. Not too hard to get some virtual reality glasses or have those effects. On first look at a square, it'll look like a 1-to-2 rectangle. What about permanent compression? What if we've been fitted with compressing lenses our whole life? If you like, add compensating motor effectors and so on too, would we then be subject to illusion? Well, here I think intuition is a bit less clear. Many people have said then that the first 2 puzzles, we won't be subject to illusion. I take that to be that's the dominant reaction to the first 2, I think. And taking polls, and people about this one tend to be divided much more evenly, and maybe even a majority of inclination to say yes in this case. Then we would have been subject to size illusions. I'm going to say the answer is no. I'm going to argue for that in a second. Likewise, you can ask about inversion of twin cases for size. And here, rather fortunately, we're in Crete, the home of El Greco, the great painter who especially late in his career, painted people with these very elongated forms. They're all about, they're all very tall and thin. And likewise, the animals and so on. Everything in his environment seems to be very tall and thin. To the point that some people have asked whether he himself suffered from some weird visual illusion that made everything seem, twice as tall and thin as it actually is. Although, on a moment of reflection, you think, well, surely his paintings would then have looked twice as tall and thin to him too, and he would have ended up painting things quite normally. But there are people who have done some quasi-serious psychophysical thinking about this sort of case. But anyway, we can now, inspired by our local hero El Greco, who has a couple of paintings from earlier in his career, just in the other room. Inspired by El Greco, we can think about El Greco world, a part of the universe where everything is stretched out 2 to 1 in a certain direction that's otherwise the same. And this is a thought experiment that originally comes from Susan Hurley that Brad Thompson has really developed. And again, you might think this is somewhat incoherent, but it's incoherent. It will be like a stretched movie of normal life on Earth. We can argue about whether it's compatible with the laws of physics. I think it actually is, and I'll give you a case for relativity in a second, but a thought experiment doesn't require that. So now we think about an El Greco twin case. So Max on Earth sees a square. His functional duplicate, twin Max, on El Greco world, sees what I would call a 2 to 1 rectangle and says, that's square. Is twin Max mistaken? Is he having an illusory experience? Well, at this point, I think a lot of people's first reaction is to say, well, yeah, he's going to be having the same kind of experience. He's going to be having a square experience. It'll be wrong. It'll be a rectangle. And he'll be suffering from an illusion. Whereas I'm inclined to say he's having the same experience as us, a square experience, and it's vertical, because his term square actually refers to what we call rectangles. Now, you could just leave that level of intuition, but I think this is actually a case where we can bring in some cool thought experiments, and physically possible thought experiments to help us judge the case. And here, we can appeal to a little bit of help from the special theory of relativity. So according to special relativity, if an object is traveling at the right speed, close enough to the speed of light, about 0.87 times the speed of light, relative to us, its length will contract by a factor of 2 in the direction of travel. It's a standard prediction of the theory of relativity. So a 1 meter long stick, 1 meter long in the direction of travel, accelerated to the speed, will contract to be half a meter long. A sphere will contract to a compressed spheroid. At least that's the correct way to describe it from our viewpoint. So now, we can introduce a hypothetical planet which we'll call Lorentz Earth. Lorentz Earth is a physical duplicate of Earth. It's a physical duplicate of our whole galaxy or something, if you like, traveling at 0.87 times the speed of light relative to us. I think there's no particular objection to the physical possibility of such a thing. Then people on Lorentz Earth will be functional duplicates of us, but compressed 2 to 1 in the direction of travel. It's actually going to be a Lorentz spheroid, from our perspective, with all these compressed people on it. All these people around the North Pole will be compressed. People on the equator will be really short and squat. But depending on which direction we accelerate the bend. Now let's take someone who's roughly oriented in the direction of travel. Then Albert on Earth will see a square. His counterpart, compressed Albert, on Lorentz Earth, sees what he calls a square, which is actually what we would call a 2 to 1 rectangle, because it's been compressed in a certain direction. Now we can ask, is one of Albert and compressed Albert suffering from an illusion? Or both? Or neither? Well, in this case, I think it's very, very implausible that exactly one of them is having an illusion. After all, the situation is completely symmetrical from an objective point of view. In this standard theory of relativity, there's no absolute reference frame. From God's point of view, so to speak, it's not like I'm at rest and compressed and Lorentz Earth is moving. It's completely symmetrical. There's just a bunch of different reference frames. So assuming that Albert is having a vertical experience, so is twin Albert. If that's right, that already strongly suggests that the word square is twin-earthable. Twin Albert uses it to pick out what we call 2 to 1 rectangles. This is how the words, an Albert square doesn't apply to that thing. We say that thing is actually rectangular. Now there's a natural fallback here, which is, okay, maybe square is twin-earthable and things aren't things on compressed Earth, those things on Lorentz Earth aren't squares, they're rectangles, but they're still square star. Let's say, introduce a square star or rest square, which is to say something like, to be square star, to be square in a reference frame at which one is at rest. And that's not twin-earthable, because, the thing that Twin Albert sees when he has a square experience may not be square, but it's at least rest square, it's square star. It's got that property. You might think, okay, that's not twin-earthable, we've at least got a grip on that. Still, it's already interesting that square is not twin-earthable. And we can push things further by moving to a hypothetical case called absolute Lorentz Earth. Now consider Lorentz Earth as a counterfactual supposition that we're in a world with a slightly different physics. This is like relativity, but there's an absolute reference frame. And this is something which has been widely discussed in the physics and philosophy literature. It seems to be perfectly coherent. Some presentists actually appeal to the hypothesis there is such an absolute reference frame to help deal with their worries about the present. Whether or not it's actual, it's at least coherent. This is, So we'll add the stipulation as an absolute reference frame, and just to make it interesting, we won't make it the one in which we're at rest, we'll make it a reference frame in which Lorentz Earth and Twin Albert are at rest. We're actually the ones who are moving with respect to the absolute reference frame. Now we can ask, well, is Albert suffering from an illusion, and is Twin Albert suffering from an illusion? If we found ourselves to be in this case, would we say we're suffering from an illusion? My own view about this case is no. The absolute Lorentz Earth case would be treated like the Lorentz Earth case. The existence of this hidden absolute reference frame, which really doesn't make any difference to the physics and observations and so on, the dynamics, shouldn't affect these judgments of veridicality. It might even turn out, just say God somehow tells us, or somehow we discover there is an absolute reference frame with respect to which we're moving. Would we then say that our shape experiences our whole life have been illusory because, these things which we see as spherical are actually elliptical with respect to the absolute reference frame? I think it's pretty clear that we say no. We might introduce some technical sense of the word square, where the objects we see as square are actually they're not absolutely square or square in the absolute reference frame. We introduce some language to mark that distinction, but I think we still say that what is to be square in ordinary language, as represented in ordinary experience, is to be this other thing called macro square or square relative to us. So our shape experiences are not illusory. Now, El Greco world, once you got this far with Lorentz Earth, absolute Lorentz Earth, I think we've basically motivated this view of El Greco world, which is relatively like absolute Lorentz Earth. And incidentally, Lorentz Earth and absolute Lorentz Earth provide a nice way of illustrating that something like El Greco world is at least coherent. If Albert and Twin Albert both have vertical experiences, so do Max and Twin Max on El Greco world. If we turned out to be in El Greco world, I think we deem that our experience is vertical. Our term square picks out what the rest of the galaxy calls 2-to-1 rectangles. That's one full ring term. Okay, so if this is right, then even shape terms are twin-earthable. And so are relative size terms, like twice as long as. So shape terms are twin-earthable because shape on twin Earth picks out rectangles for Twin Albert. So are relative size terms twice as long as. After all, if they weren't, then it wouldn't work to square either. So we don't have a transparent graph of shape or relative size. And now you can go through the same set of alternatives. Absolutism holds that we transparently graph squares. In El Greco world, in absolute Lorentz Earth, only one twin has a vertical shape experience. The other one gets things wrong. There's some very hard questions that I hope to say about the Lorentz Earth case, and why, again, the skepticism, and why I think anything in our environment really is square, especially given we live in this relativistic world with different reference frames. Alternative 2 is phenomenal externalism. Experience depends on the environment. So twins in absolute Lorentz Earth and El Greco world have different experiences. One's exposed to squares, the other one's exposed to rectangles. Phenomenal externalism predicts one has squarish experiences, the other one has rectangularish experiences. Again, there's a worry what to say though about Lorentz Earth. It's also very curious that these people on absolute Lorentz Earth and El Greco world are going to supposedly be having these rectangular experiences, even though everything they say and all their action patterns seem to treat the object as symmetrical and as being square. The phenomenal differences between Earth and El Greco world, the rectangularity of their experience doesn't seem to show up in their action and judgment patterns at all. So it's a little bit odd to make sense of the idea they're really having rectangular experiences. Alternative 3 is the error theory. Again, I have a little bit of sympathy for in this case. We grasp, at least at the level of phenomenal representation, we grasp these primitive, Adenic, relative size and relative shape properties, relative size and shape properties, which nothing has in a non-classical world. But at least, the thought is now, well, in Eden, there really were squares, pure primitive squares, and then we had a fall from Eden because we turned out to live in this relativistic, non-mechanical world, but nothing is perfectly square. You might think that at least these properties are represented in experience. And I think there are, if you can make a case, there are these perfect squareness properties just instantiated in Eden, not in our world, that we're related to in experience. And you might then say again that, as in the color case, that for our experiences to be perfectly vertical, things to be just as they seem in experience, we need there to be Adenic squares in our environment. In our own world, there are no Adenic squares, but our experiences can be imperfectly vertical, to use some terminology from that Eden paper, which requires only that objects have the properties that normally cause these experiences in us. The overall view that emerges from all of these cases is a view that I call spatial functionalism, analogous to the color functionalism discussed earlier. It says that, roughly, we don't transparently grasp the spatial properties and the spatial relations that are instantiated in our world. There's a view we might call spatial primitivism that says we do transparently grasp these things, and that's maybe the Organ, Wheeler, Bergson view. But spatial functionalism says we pick out these spatial properties and relations in virtue of their causal roles, the roles they play, and in particular in virtue of the important role of their causing relevant kinds of experience in us. That's to say that our relation to space is very much like that classic view of our relation to color. But an interesting residual question here is if spatial terms are phenotable, we don't grasp them transparently. Same for color terms. What expressions, if any, are not phenotable? What properties in our world do we grasp transparently? And that's a really interesting question, which I've talked about a lot in a book I have coming out later this year. But before going to right, not color properties, not spatial properties or corresponding expressions. I think you can do the same for time. Stretched out Earth, everything takes twice as long, and the phenomenality is otherwise similar. We don't absolutely grasp time. Maybe we grasp Adenic space and Adenic time, though, and Adenic color, as they're not instantiated in our world. As for things which are instantiated in our world, I think the best cases are things like consciousness and other mental properties. I think it's pretty hard to get a Foucault case going for consciousness without illusion. And likewise for other mental things. Also nomic structure, like the notion of law of nature, the notion of causation, and structural notions like fundamentality, as well as logical and mathematical expressions. All that takes much more development. But the view that emerges is a kind of structuralism about the features of our world that we actually grasp. And Howard was gesturing in that direction yesterday. Tends to suggest that the only instantiated features of the world that we transparently grasp are mental and structural features. Not those spatial and temporal and color quality features that we might have thought we grasped, insofar as we grasp further non-structural features that the world seems to have, like Adenic redness or squareness. They're not, in fact, instantiated in our world at all. Okay, so just final reflection to tie all this to skepticism. If the kind of skeptical scenarios I'm talking about left-right inversions, size variations, shape compression, and so on, if all these skeptical scenarios can in fact be ruled out, I think they can, so can many Cartesian skeptical scenarios. After all, the intuition, many people have the intuition that Cartesian scenarios like I'm in the Matrix, I'm being fooled by an evil demon. Many people have the intuition that those involve illusion. And
content by itself does not suffice to explain phenomenology, because our experience of, let's say, phenomenal redness cannot be captured by the description, I quote, the property that normally causes red phenomenal experiences in us. The phenomenal character of experience does not comprehend neither the physical property nor the causal relation. The phenomenal character of experience is better understood if we maintain that the experience represents perfect properties, that is, for example, perfect redness. These properties are Edenic, as they are not instantiated in our world, but only in Eden, that is, in a world that corresponds perfectly to the phenomenology of perception. I would like to pursue further the nature of Edenic properties, especially the spatial ones, but in order to understand better the issue, I will start with color properties and say something on color and then come back to space. According to Chalmers, Edenic color properties are uninstantiated in the physical world, as we have said. Nevertheless, our experience, I quote, present us an Edenic world and thereby represent an ordinary world. Quote. So, although our world does not instantiate perfect properties, we are presented with them in experience. We must also notice that Edenic content is common to veridical and hallucinatory experience, so in hallucination too, we experience uninstantiated properties. At this point, a question arises about the nature of these properties and of their relation to our experience. What is an uninstantiated property and how we can experience it? We could conceive uninstantiated color properties as universals. For example, perfect redness is a universal whose instances are the colors we see in objects. If such a universal is thought of as an abstract entity or as a Platonic universal, which lies outside space and time, then how can we experience it in veridical perception or hallucination? It's easier. But of course, we can endorse a nominalist view of universals and maintain that universals are not something more than their instances, but in this way we cannot solve our problem, as according to this view there are no uninstantiated universals. Chalmers examines the possibility of a projectivist interpretation of perfect color properties. This is projectivism is the view mostly propounded by Bogosian and Velleman. According to them, color properties, I quote, are mental properties instantiated by one's visual field, end quote, which are then projected to the world. So Chalmers considers the view that perfect color properties are such properties instantiated in mental objects. These mental objects, seen in this way, are of course the notorious sense data. Okay. The philosopher rejects sense data, mentioning the familiar objections against them, such as the spectral Ken argument, but without arguing further on the subject in this context. Although he finds the projectivist account of colors attractive, he is not persuaded by the idea that also perfect special properties can be instantiated in mental objects. Nevertheless, he thinks that projectivism is worth considering as a way to understand Edenic properties. If we turn now to spatial properties, we can consider the thought experiments of Brad Thompson and thought experiments that David offered us today. Such experiments are analogous to the inverted spectrum scenarios, which aim to show that phenomenal content cannot be Russellian in regard to color properties. David Chalmers presented just now different aspects of such thought experiments in order to show, among other things, that phenomenal spatial properties are endemic ones and are not instantiated in our world, that is, in the physical world. I won't repeat them. I just mention that the El Greco world, because here and say that, for example, it is conceivable that in El Greco world, the same phenomenal spatial properties represent different properties in the world. That is, max and twin max have the same phenomenon. We have experience of a circle or a square, let's say a circle, but in the case of twin max, this experience is caused by an ellipse. This is an Greco word. So it must be noted, just come to how I understand what's the point of this experiment. The main point is that the phenomenal content of experience is not Russellian. This means that space phenomenal properties are not identical with the properties of physical objects, as the same phenomenal properties can correspond to different physical ones. According to Chalmers, in experience we are related to Edenic spatial properties, let's say Edenic squareness, which are not instantiated in our world, so in the physical world. So, if we want to explore the nature of Edenic spatial properties, we can use the following clues. These properties are presented in our experience. As we have access to them through direct acquaintance, it's odd to say that they are not instantiated. Why not say that, as with color properties, that they are mental properties instantiated in our visual field? This field is not identical with physical space. It is rather a kind of phenomenal space in which phenomenal shapes and sizes are located. So in case Edenic properties are in phenomenal space, the problem of their connection to physical properties arises again, as in cases of sense data. What are the solutions Chalmers offers? We have already said that in addition to Edenic content, there is another level of phenomenal content, Phrygian content, which consists of the special properties which serve as the normal cause of the Edenic ones. These Phrygian properties are, as Chalmers says, imperfect properties that match perfect Edenic properties. According to him, quote, a property matches a given perfect property for a given subject if the property is the normal cause of the associated phenomenal property in the subject, end of quote. In the case of color, an imperfect property of redness can be thought of as a spectral reflectance property, that is a physical property that normally causes red experiences. As for imperfect spatial properties, they match perfect properties if they are the cause of these perfect spatial properties in the subject. In this context, we have imperfect realism, as there is an appropriate causal relation of the phenomenal character to the Russellian property in the world. In Eden, we have perfect realism, let's say, as there is direct contact with the Edenic world. How we are to understand this causal relation? When the light from an object reaches the retina, processes in the optical system and the brain take place, which lead to the experience of a color or a shape. But the Edenic properties which form our phenomenal content and are instantiated in phenomenal space cannot be identified with brain states. Thus, we do not have here the usual kind of causal relations between physical objects. There is, of course, a causal chain from the object to certain brain states. Phenomenal properties supervene on these states. Only in this sense, imperfect properties in the world cause perfect, or properties, identic properties which belong to the phenomenal content of experience. And this, of course, there are problems about the hard problem, relation, brain states, consciousness, still not, and so, as Chalmers shows us in the thought experiments he presented, Edenic special properties are not instantiated in our world, I repeat. This means that what is phenomenally present is not the properties that are instantiated in the physical world. There's a matching relationship, but there is no privileged connections between a certain Edenic property and a corresponding property in the world. As we have seen, the same Edenic property, that is the property of being square, may correspond to different properties on Earth and in a Greek world. There are two comparisons which could help us understand better the Edenic world and its relations to the real one. This is made by Chalmers in his book, The Fall from Eden. First, the Edenic world is compared to Sellars' manifest image of the world, which is very roughly the common way through which we conceive the world and ourselves. The scientific image is a new framework built gradually from the manifest image, which includes new entities such as subatomic particles, quantum, whatever entities are postulated by science. Sellars understands the manifest image as a world of appearances, while science will ultimately reveal the real nature of things. This distinction between manifest and scientific image is used by Chalmers to highlight the difference between the Edenic world of phenomenology, of the world I quote, exactly as it seems to us, end of quote, and the real world of science, which diverges from the Edenic one. Concerning spatial properties in Eden, we have a classical Euclidean space, while the world that science gives us is non-Euclidean, described by Einstein's theory of the interdependence of space and time. So, as Chalmers says, since we have eaten from the tree of science, we know that we are not in Eden anymore. Secondly, according to Chalmers, the Edenic world has some similarities with Kant's phenomenal world, while the physical world, or matrix world, can be compared to the nominal world of the things in themselves. Of course, there are also the similarities here, because for Kant, the world in itself is unknowable. For Chalmers, we can have various worlds that match the phenomena. For example, the computational world of matrix can be seen as the underlying basis of our experience. Science explains the world through quantum mechanics and relativity theory, but even in this picture, the intrinsic nature of the world, the Ding an sich, remains unknown. We know only structural properties of the world, let's say. And in this sense, what we must learn is to have Kantian humility. This is an expression borrowed by Ray London's book. And now, my conclusions. What can we conclude about Edenic content? First, we can see that it's phenomenal content which were directly acquainted. If we argue that Edenic properties cannot mirror phenomenology if they are just abstract entities, we might understand Edenic content as consisting of mental properties lying in phenomenal space. Then why, that's my questions, why cannot we say that the phenomenal content of perception mediates between the perceiver and the world, and that through perception alone we cannot have access to a mind-independent world? And in this case, perhaps Chalmers' realism is
comments. There's too much there to fully satisfactorily address, but I'll just say a couple of things. One is that what I did in the talk was really all cast at the level of the phenomenal character and the contents of spatial experience and other kinds of experience. And I really left to one side issues about their metaphysics and their constitution. So from my view, at the level of the content, the color experiences consists of some representation of these dynamic properties, and spatial experience consists of representation of these dynamic spatial properties, and then derivatively you get these triggering contents that pick out things in the world. And this does raise many important questions about how is it that experiences have these contents, and this is getting into the metaphysical issues. And about that, I mostly say neutral in the paper and in this paper, but my view is that one obvious part of how you come to be related to these data properties, which are not instantiated by anything in the environment, which is instantiated in your mind, so to speak, or some movie as non-external objects, which becomes related, and that would be a sense-data view. So my view is recommending that you maybe some related to some sense data that actually have these properties. Another view would be the adverbial view where experience have those properties. But the sense data view says, some mental or non-physical things involved with our minds actually have these properties. I can say I find it, I don't know, have knocked down objections to this view. I think one way things could go, we can take it literally. I'm kind of odd things in my head. My conception of the Garden of Eden, with all you guys doing all this genetic color and spatial, it really is instantiated. It's just instantiated in my head. My head is the way I think. My mind is the way I think the Garden of Eden to be. Boy, that's like a revisionary conception of my mind. You're a being, I realize it's that big. So, I don't know, maybe there's another sense data view where it's not actually the property represented in different space or different color, but some other related properties like properties, space drive, and red drive. It's a bit less mind-boggling, and that could perhaps be some story about how things would go. Well, let's say, see why things need to go that way. It also seems you don't have to do where things are related to uninstantiated properties. Speaking for myself, I don't see why the fundamental story couldn't involve representation of or awareness of certain properties which are not instantiated. That might be a correct view of phenomenology. People really divide here. Say, no fundamental appeal to uninstantiated properties unless it's kind of grounded in instantiation. I should say all this is also meant to be consistent with physical. You could tell some physical story about how we come to represent these uninstantiated properties, just as people tell physical stories about how we come to represent uniform. It's a very non-trivial project in the physical aspect. I don't mean here to be bullied out. Then the other question is imperfect realism. In the paper on Eden, I say this is not indirect realism, it's just imperfect realism. The world is not quite how we initially conceived it to be, chronologically, etc., but we're still perceiving things in the world directly. I still perceive and share it, just genetically misintroduce some genetic properties to it that it doesn't have the level of ordinary content to get right. In any case, there's no mediating object. And my idea is if I go the sensitive way, then I will have a mediating object. I suppose that's one reason why we resist the sense data and view. It turns out there are such objects that we just need to get into what's so bad about that. One reason why people think that sense data are bad is it leaves you subject to worry about skepticism. If I'm right about the structural concept of skepticism, or that might be slightly less of a concern. You might also worry that we have indirect realism, indirect perception for properties, not for objects. How do I get to perceive ordinary redness? Well, by representing the genetic redness. So you might say that my relation to ordinary redness is psychologically mediated. I have a more fundamental relation to the genetic redness. And in that case, I think maybe I am more vulnerable to the charge of indirect perception for properties. And then I would say this that. Of course, a skeptical worry, I think how to respond to other worries. We can talk about that.
Just about verbal theory, because we had a discussion, is perhaps more palatable to you than sense data or verbal theory.
It's less powerful for me than to say that, because I find very strong the intuition that experience as a relational character. I am related to properties in experience. I have an awareness, content, structure, that my experience is structured. When I have these related experiences, it's because I'm aware of awareness, and that's part of the fundamental structure of the experience. That's an intuition which is respected by sensitivity, by intentionalism, and by innate realism. But I don't think it's really respected by the realism. I think it's by experience as a mnemonic structure. It is right. I mean, yeah, the realism is for the stories that I can tell. But for that reason, I'm actually less sympathetic with realism than the others.
So pleasure, please. We'll start with, yeah, you.
Because I just had a question about the Alberto world and the Lorenz world. Because I'm having a hard time getting my head around why the subjects would have experiences with the same phenomenal character with respect to shape as the experiences we have. So is the thought that because their eyes would be stretched out too, the retinal image that they would get would be isomorphic to the retinal image we get?
Well, in the first instance, the reason was that you functional isomorphs. So this functional isomorph is roughly one that implements the same computational structure, decomposable into a bunch of components with a bunch of patterns, certain pattern interactions. And I've taken the person in Lorentz world, in this case, it's clearly going to be a functional isomorph. I mean, a movie of Lorentz world, take their brain, a movie of their brain, will just like a movie of our brain, just compressed. So when a neuron fires another brain, a corresponding stretched neuron will fire their brain, and it affects two other neurons, it will also affect two other neurons. You'll find just the same computational, abstract, causal structure there. And I'm taking it that it's fairly plausible that functional organization determines phenomenology, and he's sort of has to realizing properties like, yeah, spatial layout of the brain doesn't matter. So that was the first reason.
Okay, so I just have a follow-up about the details of the Lorenz Earth case, right? So suppose we were sped up, right? Now, would you say that we wouldn't notice because our eyes would be stretched out in relevant ways, and the functional goings on would be roughly the same?
Did you say sped up?
Yeah, so if we were sped up.
So time pace.
Right. Well, so I thought that what was going on in the Lorenz case is that they were moving faster than us, closer to the speed of light.
Yeah.
Right. So
Sped up, and accelerated.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's very, very plausible that if we were gradually sped up, we wouldn't notice it.
Okay, so suppose we were really quickly sped up.
Yeah.
Would we notice the difference?
Well, I think you just have to feel some acceleration.
But there wouldn't be any change in our,
But
or there wouldn't be any change in our visual phenomenal character associated with shape.
I don't see any different reason for this. I mean, we have cases of people undergoing like a good acceleration close to the speed of light. But astronauts accelerate. They certainly feel the acceleration, but things look much the same to them. And I'm thinking if we were quickly accelerated to the speed of light, we'd feel some very smooth losses. But I don't see any particular reason to think that apart from weird models that are feeling acceleration with square things look anything other than square. I think the same to do with things like the twin experiments is that when people get accelerated near the like things look exactly as normal to them, apart from acceleration effects, but that's how things are in their new reference area. It says from the point of view of people on Earth that they're compressed. From their own point of view, everything is perfectly normal. I think the standard view would be that the occurrences are the same. Again, it's really important that in relativity there is no absolute reference frame. So, kind of a lot of those people really have rectangular experiences, and we have square experiences. I haven't got to give them the rectangular experiences. Square experiences, vice versa.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering whether, so this doesn't apply to the Greco case, but it might apply to the Lorenz case. whatever goes on in the speeding up might in some way interfere with how the visual system responds to it.
I mean, it's true that if you start breaking fast enough, G-forces on the body really have some effect. So I don't think that's good. Slowly enough that the body doesn't particularly notice. Or we could just imagine the world's always been going that way. Life evolved on that spin-up world the way that it evolved here. The acceleration came in way before the evolution of life. And so on. Life will evolve in the same way. Then, whether there will be any interaction between the fact that they're moving that way and the
interactions between objects and our visual systems, which are reasons to suppose they any different.
I think the functional, the structural dynamics, I think it's standard. At least quite a standard concept of relativity could be just the same, I think.
So, how is
to make a distinction, I think it might have further consequences. A distinction between, first of all, consequences for your advice to matrix skepticism. I think there's a difference between scientific Freudianism and metaphysical Freudianism. So, you find out what water refers to here on twin Earth by doing some science. So, as it were, day-ray nature or the external nature of natural kind systems is internal to what could be found in that world scientifically. Now, in a matrix, if you're allowed to do the science, you wouldn't come across the computer states as the things that lie behind these things. You come across whatever you come across, whatever the real world will be like. I mean, what the illusory world will be like. And it's not obvious to me that even in a natural kind external semantics, you want to have whatever is the cause, even if it bears no scientifically discoverable systematic relation to the experience, as being what the semantics refers to. Now, the reason why I think that's important is that if what lies behind our experience is different from the manifest world in a certain kind of way, it may be what causes our physical world. It's not going to count as our physical world, just as the computer states don't count as the physical world for people in the matrix. It's the nominal background, but it's not the physical reality for them. That's much more like, then it might as well be the ideas in the mind of God or anything. It's some kind of knowing structure underlying. It's not even knowing structure in that case. So I don't think you can say that really in the matrix world, cube meant some kind of computer circuit in the way you can say that water also in the matrix world.
Yeah, so clear way to make such a difference that we can actually discover these things to be the case. So in the H2O case, you certainly discovered no answer to the other thing. We've certainly discovered that water is made of H2O. In other cases, we haven't yet discovered the fundamental nature of things. We just take it that we do have a fundamental nature. Those two things we're referring to that fundamental nature, whether we know about it or not. Just say it turns out in some case, just say it turns out we couldn't discover that water was H2O, but it was made of H2O all along. Then you would have thought, well, then we would have been referring to the champion kind H2O or XYZ. Now it's not a random experiment. Just say Oracle comes along and tells us, in fact, whether you can ever discover this, all this stuff is actually made of H2O. That's actually my understanding of the experiment myself. Someone has told me, if one comes along and tells me this stuff is made of H2O. Likewise, in matrix case, one way it works is the way it actually works in the movie. People take a red pill to discover they are a matrix, and all this is computationally constituted. Another way it works is there's no red pill. You never discover this. So it's not really why the discovery should make the ability to discover this actually make a difference. I think it's the fact that this stuff is constituting the stuff we see.
Right. I don't think the actual ability to discover it is that, in principle, a scientific investigation on the basis of the experiences you're having would ask you to all those facts. It's part of your natural world that the science will lead. In the total illusion case, it's a pure accident, so to speak, that what underlies it is what it is and not something else. It's not an actual projection of discovery.
I don't really see why find to be an accident. And in the matrix situation, certainly absolutely no accident. This structure goes back to what we set up by being able to produce experiences like this. These turn out to be the things which are revolving it. With the paper on the matrix, well, they're the relevant scenarios. You can find scenarios where we discover physics to have a level of computation underlying it. People like Stephen Wolfram and can hypothesize we live in such a world. And then the conceding here is the matrix world, one which is just like that. It's where computation, in fact, is underlying it. One way to go is that we can discover that. Another way to go is that. It turns out that doesn't also have a lot from empirical investigation part, but it's still nonetheless doing all the work. I'm going to say, look, despite that difference, whether we can come to know it or not, the structure of what we're referring to is pretty much the same. So in the matrix paper, I really have argued that if we are in the matrix scenario, that's what physics is. Physics is somehow computationally constituted, and that's not a non-physical world. That's what actually constitutes the physics of our world.
First, Alexis and then Angela.
I think there's a collapse in your argumentation from corollary inversion to size and left-right version, and then to illustration. The first case of spectrum inversion is really speaking prime, so I think it's causally irrelevant. Left-right inversion is egocentric space, so again, we don't have perhaps many problems, but where we come to have problems with our physics is in the strange world, and I don't speak about the eccentric world, take our world and the rectangle case. So imagine that you have a rectangle which can seem to someone as a square, and you have a device traveling from side A to side C, and then from side B to side D in steady speed. So what it will seem to an observer about the speed of the device traveling this way and traveling that way.
Which is A, which is C,
which is rotation. So you have A, B, C, D. So you have a short distance.
A, B,
Physically, politically short distance. A and C, B and D.
I think you mean A and B and then A and D.
I mean, a device which travels from side to side. So this from this to this, and then taking on an horizontal plane, not to make any radiation. Yes, okay. So what it really seems like to an observer about the time we take for the device. I mean, if it travels in the same time span in both trajectories, then you will have to alter your physics, which is, I think, if the device has the same resources, which I think this is metaphysically difficult, or that it will appear to the observer that the device travels in rectangle case. When it does appear to the observer as a square, then the observer to which the rectangle appears as a square will have the feeling that the device will travel faster in one trajectory than in the other. And the other possibility is that you have also your time phenomenology observed, but you will have to query with your space phenomenology. So you have a space-time phenomenology observed, and you have another algorithm which matches one Earth to the other Earth. And then, of course, I think if you have another space-time algorithm phenomenology match, then you could have that. So you isolate totally different, and so it doesn't matter anymore. And so we can be friends in that, and that doesn't change much.
Look, I think it's not so complicated as that. I mean, basically, to get a rough idea of what the dynamics will, so take a situation where somebody in the traveling world is in a situation where it looks like they're confronted with a square, something coming from A to B in 1 second, and from A to C in 1 second. It looks to them as if C is 1 meter from A, and B is 1 meter from A, and they're 90 degrees separated. Then, from our perspective, how will this look? I think it will look exactly the way that it would look if you took this movie and compressed it. So it will look as if something is, let's say, compressed in one direction. It will look as if something is traveling 1 meter from A to C in 1 second. And it will look like something is traveling 1 meter, half a meter. Hey, quiet back! 1 meter, half a meter from A to B in half a second. So, that's exactly what relativity theory will predict about this case. I'll say that it's going to be non-compressed. Let's say that A to B is perpendicular to the direction of motion. So that will also be 1 meter, and it will take 1 second to travel that 1 meter. But this will be compressed, so to half a meter, and it will be traveling more slowly. I think about motion, but at least in the other case, right? I think about it, it'll be traveling shorter distance, and will therefore be traveling more slowly. Velocity will be compressed in roughly the same way that the distance is compressed. So I think just thinking about the compressed movie will give you a rough idea of the dynamics. Some non-rigid bodies, things that appear to them to be rigid, will appear to be non-rigid to us. I think we can make it all coherent, and in the case of relativity, shows that it is coherent. Because relativity theory precisely describes the dynamics of such a case.
So this is a question about how to understand the puzzles and what they're asking us, what emotions you're trying to get us to report on here. So first I thought you were talking about the kind of content we can expect. So if things be twice as large as they need to be, given how we expect them, that would be dense content. But then it's clear at the end that they make our identity spatial properties not substantiated. And that's not what you're talking about. So it's either you're talking about some kind of framing content, but it's not kind of wondering how you're supposed to, how you want to take a grip on this content so that we can answer those questions.
It didn't actually start out very much about content at all. I think I missed a key point. We're just talking about properties and illusions.
Yeah, but just kind of to read the sentences and understand the questions that you're asking. You have to have content space, and I was thinking that you're asking to evaluate given the identity contents associated with the words. So could things that seem to be on the right, on the identity right, be on the identity left? Rather than
so I guess I didn't mean to be approaching the levels here. Again, I was just meant to be doing it intuitively in terms of left and right. In the sense in which things are on our left and are on our right. And I try to lay out certain options. And, roughly, so two of the options I laid out, I was actually talking at the level of the ordinary content all the time. Whether these identity properties that we're perfectly represent these ordinary properties and these imperfectly represent. I think our ordinary comes left and right, picking out things like the ordinary selling content, the things that we're forgetting content is about,
I think there's some side of hand going on in those examples. Put in little brackets, let's adjust the motor effect of organs correspondingly. Now, of course, the reason I'm interested in the effective side of it is because actually I think the phenomenal content consists in monitoring our own response to we reach out to the external world. But in some of your cases, it would be quite easy to adjust the motor correspondingly. In some cases, as I think Alexis is pointing out, it actually wouldn't be at all easy to do. You can imagine how one could do the 2-to-1 distortion, for example, and just adjust the motor side of things correspondingly. And I think there's be more interesting cases which aren't obviously translatable on the motor side. I've previously discussed, for example, the easy case where spiraling clockwise or anti-clockwise, for example, could easily be there's two things. But splitting one took moving away from oneself or towards oneself. I'm interested in because that's beginning to attach value to something in terms of how we absorb it or reject it. I don't think, just to take that one simple case, movement away from or towards oneself is unearthable, and it's precisely because it isn't. That generates an interesting case where the phenomenal content is beginning to seem real.
Yeah, the away case is interesting. On the shape case, the 2-1 case, I just want to say that physics tells us where you can draw this relativity theories, the compression in certain direction, the dynamics, and I can get a perfectly clear story about how an environment which is just like how 2-1 compressed would work. And yeah, the motor stuff all compensating in this compressed world, and it's just like the stretched out movies. So I want to that one is.
Well, you did. I guess the Lorentz transformation is okay, but you first introduced it as a distinct might take place with the sort of effect.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, the British transformation gives us a version of it, which will which is perfectly coherent. Whether it's going to work with distorting lenses is a further question. I actually introduced the distorting lenses really for the temporary case. And for the temporary case, all that needed was momentary solution. And so we give those lenses for a moment everything looks compressed, that's fine. Now, it may well be that the moment I start acting, then there's going to be, I'm going to realize this, and after a while things will adjust. All I needed for my purposes then was the initial case. Yes, whether permanent distorting lenses, whether they can be scenario with permanent distorting lenses and everything else distorted and so on, that is very much an open question, but one possibility I needed to hear. The away in our case, which was the key case, it is very interesting. Certainly one claim that this kind of thing is involved. I do think that insofar as away just means getting further away, then I think that's distortable in a sense. There might be some cases which, in irreparable, it might be a situation where things might be more, something would be more obvious, but I was getting closer, whereas what they described was getting further away because it's moving in a pressing direction.
Not from oneself.
Even from myself, but it would just be, it's not a case of moving directly from oneself and directly further away. Whether that's invertible is, I'm certainly not trying to argue that relation. I'm also inclined to there are things like continuity relations, spatial continuity relations, such as far from obvious that they're invertible. So here I'm arguing that every property of space is invertible. Although actually I'm inclined to think that a lot more what we think is going on is invertible than not. And the matrix also, maybe the matrix is an arguably good case where the current continuity, the continuity at the underlying level, and I think more about the near and away case.
Okay, Richard?
Thanks. Wait, I did?
Both ways.
No, how about that? In the middle? No? I just want to carry on the next question about kind of matching up touch and vision. So in the first case, it's the rotation case, which I can see how you can match up vision and touch. Size, okay. I'm less convinced about shape. And well, I guess the worry I have there and it's pretty heroic at the moment, is what model of touch you're using, or you have to presuppose in order to get it to work. For instance, you have to accommodate well, for instance, if you have a template model of touch, how is that? Are you going to be able to is there going to be a difference between what is sensed by a hand that uses a template to represent a shape or something, than if you follow accommodate the play with the brain?
Yeah.
You see what I mean? The general question is, I'm just a bit suspicious that you're applying it to a certain model of touch, which is going to do the job.
I see the worry, and I certainly something like the analog compressing lenses for touch is a highly non-trivial issue. I mean, you might think, okay, what we're going to do is change the input of the brain so that when you feel something that feels like it's 1 centimeter across, it produces the kind of input to the brain you give something from 0.5 centimeter across. But now let's think about that for a moment. This is obviously going to interact very strongly with proprioception, and a sense of one's body, and one sense of bodies having a certain shape, and it's got touch. One sense of the body is touch is tied up proprioception in that way. And to get this going, I would need to somehow change the proprioceptive inputs so that you produce a body image or scheme or whatever it is, which is compressed in this way. And that is so deeply bound up with the body image is so deeply bound up. Maybe this is not something that can just be changed superficially in a way that visual impression of the shape of the object can be changed superficially. Maybe something like that is the worry you have. So I'd like to think there'd be some way to take the phone experiment run, so when you somehow do something to one system to produce a compressed body image and compression is enough. Maybe this is not even true. Which is why I think it's better for me to appeal to things like these Lorentz cases and Alberto cases than the analogs of compressing lenses.
Right, so the other part of the question is how far does it go? The Alberto case is stretching, but is there an analogous issue about squares and circles?
Yeah, well, that's tough one. Could it be that everything that actually is seen as a square is really a circle? Could it be a true Earth case? Circles or squares experiences of people? I don't think it's obvious it could be. I know it's obvious that they couldn't be. If I work on it just the right way, I think it's a weird geometry of the world. These circle things get flattened out in just the right way. And then you find squares actually circles actually get square experiences and weird compensation, just to make sure we get the structure right. The matrix case suggests, if I get that matrix right, you can really mess with a whole lot of stuff only to get the causal structure right. As long as we can find a weird distortion with squares or circles, but the structure compensates, then maybe we can do it. So I don't want to insist that we could, but I don't see obvious reasons why we could.
Thank you. Our last question is sounds.
Because in technical terms, it's pretty much false. Your superior is connected to right to your muscles. Now, when you do replacements on the image, now it's not on the left superior, it's on the right superior. And because on the right superior, because the right superior is connected to the left or the muscles, that's why it's so very difficult to not make the wrong movement. So we tend to look towards the left, which is the wrong. And that's why it takes so very long to train somebody with the wrist and so on. Look at the thigh. Now this has a couple of implications for what we told us. The first implication state of the twin edge subject is not the same as the edge subject. The lower electrons are figuring out the difference. The second implication is that twin edge experiments are not the period to think of. They can be misleading. There could be third interpretation for story progress. That's the interesting.
The key thing is that so left, right, conversions. I'm thinking to keep this up brain internal the same.
It will not.
It will not because
It will not, because when you put in the mirror universe, the representation will be different. The state will be different.
well, I'm thinking that we invert the things just outside the retina. We have some left, right converting lens, so to speak, there. And we also have a left, right converting environment so that the inputs that come in are exact. So the brain is, when something is on the right, a red object on the right, it comes in, we have the inverting lens, and it produces exactly the same input to the brain as would happen in a normal case, but as a red object on the left.
And it's not to the wrong side.
Hey, right in the back. I got her.
On the wrong side, on the other side. Now, to train your brain again, you do require the output of the representation. And that's what you do. Okay? So at some point, if you rear somebody
Yeah.
in that environment, that he has always been in such an environment, then you can tell the difference because now the connections, because of the hours of causality inside the brain are different.
I don't think that the arrows of causality in the brain will be much the same because
They're not.
the internal, well, I'm stipulating the case that the internal structure of the brain is the same and the inputs are exactly the same. I think given that the initial internal structure of the brain is the same and the inputs to the brain, the retinal level and so on, are the same, the brain itself will hold in a different way. Now there are some tricky questions, of course, of how you can maintain this over time in a mirror environment. This starts interacting with the issues about just how the motor effectors will work. And so one thing so at least for a moment, we could make this happen.
You would like to have a different representation of the brain, or you would have different connections.
At least momentarily, I think.
And
Like it says, when the object is on your right,
no, no.
you represent it as being on your left.
The moment I think is where we get the wrong representation with the old connection.
Yeah.
You require.
The question is why rewiring will happen. So with standard case of up-down converting lenses, no question of some kind of rewiring. The reason is you get conflicting signals. You know, you're left, you're upside down, you're experiencing it upside down visually, but it's totally context with your tactile input and your sense of your body, and so on. The brain then is forced to rewire because of conflicting signals. If we could set up a left, right mirroring case where all the senses are inverted and the motor stuff was inverted, then arguably we wouldn't get any conflicting signals and there would never be a need for the brain to rewire. Now, I admit it suddenly comes out. It's a non-trivial question of whether we can really invert all those things permanently so that there would never be a conflict. But I agree with you that there would be rewiring only occasioned by conflict. So I think the key question here is whether we can set up a situation so that the brain never gets the kind of conflicting inputs that will require it to rewire.
Everything I said about the mirror universe also applies to the magnifying glass.
Double word? You think so? Why is that?
Again, because there the difference is not even that because of the map. The nucleus in technical terms has a map. When you put on your magnifying glasses, you project the image onto a different part of the map.
But you mean double size of the map?
Well, the size of the map can only go up to 180 degrees.
I think the angle is
The sphere is only 360 degrees. So that's the sphere. In any case, you double that, you change the location inside the map. And again, you can rewire. You train this out. Again, after moving on the magnifying, So you can't have both in those linear experiments. You can't have pi at the same time. You can't have both representations correct and your connections correct.
Again, the crucial question is going to come down to whether we can get these cases to go without any conflicting information at the level of, say, brain dynamics. And I'm thinking that in the double Earth case, if you do it right, you can have no conflicting information, and therefore the brain dynamics might be different in the original case. But if you do it wrong, you'll get conflicting information, and then I think you're
One, the first implication is that you can tell. And because you can build the science, because you can build the science